A very good evening to one and all, and I welcome you all to our very first edition of the FICCI Arise Higher webinar series for remote schooling, teaching for the new normal. At the outset, I would like to thank Higher for joining in as the knowledge partner in our web series. And I would like to welcome our co-chair, Mr. Praveen Raju, who is also the founder of Suchitra Academy, Hyderabad, and the expert panel of speakers from India and abroad who have joined us today session, which is on creating lesson plans for remote learning. So may I welcome Ms. Gayatri Mehta from Pathway Schools, Noida, Ms. Jyoti Kumar from Nehru World School, Ghaziabad, Ms. Chaitanya Kuluri from Suchitra Academy International School, Hyderabad, and Ms. Leni Dutton, International School of Stuttgart, Germany. I also take this opportunity to welcome Ms. Pallavi Dwivedi, founder Higher, who will be moderating this session post mine and Praveen's remarks. Just to give you a little bit of insight, Higher is a teacher professional development and evaluation company which enables educators and schools to make more informed choices about classroom teaching through data-driven personalized coaching programs for K-12 educators. Friends, you may be wondering that what an industry chamber like Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry is doing in the space of education. And let me inform you that we have been active for the last 2 decades, studying higher education, vocational and school education space. And we are the first non-governmental industry chamber to actually carry on research-based policy reforms studies, which we advocate to the government. And this is done in consultation with the academia as well as the industry. So we have committees that work with us, that ideate with us, and we come up with knowledge papers and government representations that are sent to the government. Apart from the conducting the extensive research in education, we also work towards mobilizing consensus among stakeholders and sharing of best practices. Recognizing the significant role the private unaided K-12 school, which has been shaping up India's education ecosystem, FICCI actually created this forum, FICCI Alliance for Reimagining School Education, in short, FICCI ARISE, and it has been active since last 4 years. And our primary focus has been on alliance, of this alliance has been on policy advocacy, defining norms for standards and transparency, advocating 21st century readiness for schools, and facilitating capacity building. I mean, we all know that this pandemic has actually completely has put the hold on the school and university education system. Just prior to starting this session, we were talking about, how there is so much of uncertainty, and things have just been pushed back, I mean, this uncertainty about when the schools will be reopening, and of course how the entire schooling education system is going to restart. But there are many of our educators and schools that have actually taken up this as a challenge, and who have been actually investing in digital education in the past to make themselves ready for the 21st century. And they have been pretty adept at actually moving in and taking this opportunity to actually digitalize the entire education ecosystem within their own school systems. However, this is a very, very limited number of schools. If you look at globally, the UNESCO data tells us that almost 89% of youth, that is children and youth in schools and universities, are outside the schooling and university ecosystem. And it's a huge number. I mean, it's about 1.54 billion children and youth who are right now actually outside the education ecosystem. And the fear is that it is going to increase the inequities, particularly where, gender is concerned, or the urban rural divide is concerned. And it's very serious for a country like India, which is, still developing, and there is so much of disparity of resources and infrastructure that is available, whether in different geographical areas. We are, what we are seeing is that teachers are actually doubling up as content curators, and parents are also stepping in, because particularly with the primary and middle school, parent intervention in actually helping in getting these online classes more effective is very, very essential. So essentially, it is not just about the teaching, learning, or the delivery of education, but the entire gamut of value chain that needs to be structured and streamlined. And many of you, and especially those who are here as panel speakers, have actually done that. Many of my friends are also in, teaching in various schools, and one of them is actually a HOD of IT in one of the leading schools in Delhi. And she was telling that the first 15-20 days were absolutely a nightmare because of, the entire, the timetable setting up, ensuring that the children are coming to the online classes. Then, how effective is the learning process, that, as well as, assessing that whether the teaching is happening seamlessly. So these were some of the challenges that one has to, to look at. But then, while pandemic is a challenge, it has also thrown up so much of opportunities towards us, and shown us a window where we can actually make our education system 21st century ready. This is also an opportunity for teachers to, upskill their skills, particularly in the digital area. Through this series, so FICCI Arise actually thought of doing a series of webinars to basically present the best and innovative pedagogical practices that is effective in the teaching learning delivery in the virtual ecosystem. And to do that, we actually have kind of figured out, instead of going class wise, we have gone it, taken it through the primary, middle, and senior secondary school, etc. And there is a kind of a methodology that we have developed to come out with the web series title. This is something which Praveen is going to be, talking in his talk more elaborately. So at the end, what I would like to say is that let's, take this challenge as an opportunity, and let's work together to ensure that learning doesn't stop for anyone. Our children in our schools are privileged, but I think our endeavor should also be to take our efforts and our capabilities and our best practices and knowledge to those who are not so privileged like us. So with this, I will stop here, and I request Praveen Raju, co-chair FICCI Arise, to come in and set the context. Over to you, Praveen.
Thank you, Shobha. I'm the founder of Suchitra Academy and Suchitra Badminton Academy in Hyderabad, and I'm also the co-chairman of FICCI Arise. I would like to take this opportunity to commend all the teachers like you who have risen to the call of duty and ensured that learning doesn't stop. You have worked doubly hard, you have embraced technology, you have sacrificed your personal time, and even though buildings are closed, you have made sure that schools are not. You are the Corona heroes along with health workers, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and the police. You all deserve a huge round of applause. A big thank you. At FICCI Arise, we always put students first. We have held many webinars and attended many more, and found that most of these webinars were focused on high-level learnings for school owners, principals, but not many focused on the practitioners themselves. There was a need to have webinars on this, on what is happening at the ground level, in the classroom. A webinar to share best practices, and a webinar to actually do what is happening at the subject level, at the ground level, through some of the very good teachers around. I'd come up with this idea and had initial discussions with Arunab Singh of Nehru World School. He thought it was a great idea, and then we discussed it in the governing body, and this is how we got working. We found great synergy in working with Pallavi Dodi Dwivedi of Higher, and here we are. And we never expected this kind of interest and this level of participation, and we are pleasantly surprised and humbled to see such a great interest. It completely beat our expectations. I would now like to invite Pallavi Dodi of Higher to start the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen, and thank you, Shobha. And good evening, participants, as well as my fellow teachers on the panel today. Very warm welcome to all of you to today's session. As we've already talked about the need and the importance of upskilling at this hour, as well as the need for sharing what's actually working in classrooms. And what better way than to actually bring to you some amazing educators who are doing some great work in their classrooms and have them share their own learnings. So which is why we put together our panel for today. And as we go along, I will introduce all of the teachers to you. You've already been acquainted with them, and we'll go a little bit deeper into what they're all going to be talking about in their respective sessions. To get us started, I'd like to introduce you to Higher. Shobha's already talked a little bit about what we do as a company. We have been working over the last month and a half particularly, in addition to what we do in our work as a professional development organization. We have been organizing webinars and online workshops for teachers to help them switch gears to remote teaching and learning. And we've also been advising schools with how they can design their strategies for upskilling their teachers, as well as switching to online teaching and learning modes. With that, I'd like to introduce you also to the teachers who are here with us today and what they're going to be talking about, as well as some of the objectives for today's session. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And if there's anybody who's having trouble with accessing any of the control panels, you can always leave us a message in the chat box. Another housekeeping tip, there will be some polls along the way, which you will all be able to access in your panels underneath your screen. And at any point in time, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them down in the Q&A box, and we'll keep coming to questions. This is a very, we were trying to keep this as interactive as we possibly can. And we're going to try and address questions as they come up after each of the sessions, or we've divided up the presentations across the four teachers. So as the sessions keep going along, we'll keep taking questions. So please put your questions down in the chat box. Any other suggestions, any other observations that you'd like to add, please feel free to put them in the chat box. When you're asked to put in a poll, you'll be able to see when the poll goes live, you'll be able to see that poll pop up in underneath your screens on the control panel. So with that, I'd like to set the context for today's session. So taking a cue from what Praveen was saying in terms of the importance of helping teachers switch to online teaching and learning, we wanted to get us started with the most important element of moving to teaching online, which is the planning part of the online teaching. And in today's session, we're largely going to focus on the various ways in which teachers can go about designing their online lesson plans, how they can structure their teaching, how they can pace their teaching out, how they can include different kinds of activities and what sort of activities should we include. And before I go into talking a little more about what all of this entails, I wanted to get a sense of where all of you are. in terms of your own planning experiences, as well as what you've encountered in your own teaching, in your own classroom teaching over the last couple of weeks that now we've been teaching online. For some of you, this may have started very recently. For some of you, you may already have moved to teaching online. So I am going to start with a very quick poll, and you'll be able to see this poll at the bottom of your screens now. And I'd like you to talk a little bit and share with us what your experiences have been, what your challenges have been, particularly when it comes to planning online. So what sort of challenges have you faced? Is it to do with pacing? Is it to do with not finding any time at all to plan? How do you include what kind of activities and so on? So please go ahead and put out your answers in the poll. A very quick 10 or 15 seconds to get everybody's inputs in, and that will give us a good place to start with as well. It'll give us a good sense of where all of you are in your planning process. So very quickly getting started with that poll. So interestingly, some of you have said that you haven't found the time to plan. Yes, these are most certainly extremely unordinary circumstances, and we've all been caught unawares in very many ways. So yes, most certainly lots of these departments would not have had found the time to plan, but we're here to help, and that's what we're going to try and do in today's session. So with that, we have some very clear answers for this poll. We have a 48% of you saying that you want to understand how you can try and pace your lessons. 43% of you are trying to decide what you should include, and a good 10% of you are saying that you haven't found the time to plan. So thank you for that, teachers. That helps us put a lot of this in context and set today's discussion rolling. So what we will be talking about in today's session largely is the different instructional models that you can use when you go about planning your sessions. And all of us here, including all the 4 faculty that are here with us today, all of us have our own ways of designing and planning for online teaching or even for classroom teaching. And many of us have actually adapted the same routines that we use for online teaching in regular classes to design their lesson plans for online teaching. Whatever we're recommending today is based on our experiences as teachers. Whatever we're recommending today is not, there's no hard and fast rule for what would work for you when you get down to planning. But there are some things that we've put together which we'd like you to perhaps keep in mind as some pointers when you start planning your own teaching and learning processes. So to introduce all of you to how we go about doing the instructional modeling for online teaching and learning, the most important part of this is, of course, dividing up your teaching and learning into either synchronous learning, where you're doing live classes, where teachers are teaching with the students present in real time, or perhaps you've set up office hours where you are available to your students at a certain point in time and students are doing activities in real time with you. Or you're planning for asynchronous learning, which is when students have been assigned work to do in their own time, when you're not available to oversee that work and nothing is happening in real time, it's not live, and they're doing it at their own time, and you've perhaps set in deadlines or put in timelines in place for them to return that work. So broadly, we are going to talk about how we can go about planning for both these situations, both synchronous learning as well as asynchronous learning. And the most crucial part of planning, be it live planning or planning for asynchronous teaching and learning, the most crucial part of this is how you go about pacing your online lessons and how you go about deciding what activities you'd want to include. What's the driving force behind that choice? How do you decide whether you're going to set out a task on a video lesson, or whether you're going to give them something in terms of a pre-recorded video to watch and then come back to you? We want to explore what goes on when you're deciding all of those different activities. And we're going to try and draw your attention to what actually makes you choose that, and put in some pointers in place to help you go around doing that planning and that choosing. And the most crucial bit that we found in terms of our own understanding of instructional modeling for designing lesson plans is the 5E model. What is the 5E model? The 5E model breaks down your lesson plan or your unit plan or your entire sequence of teaching into 5 clear portions. Now, the 5 E's are by no means a sequence of teaching. As you'll observe, the first of the 5 E's looks into engaging the students. This is when you want to establish a context, or you want to map prior knowledge, as well as perhaps the relevance of a particular content to the current environment. The second of the E's is exploration, where you present a new concept or a new content or a new process or skill that you want to introduce your students to. And the third one is explaining. When you're building on something that you've introduced, you help students express this new learning. You provide them with a little bit of guidance, with a little bit of tinkering. You get them to understand what is it that you've elaborated on, and then you move on to elaborate on that, where you're building on this new learning through applying what they've learned in both in a real world context, as well as with a connection to what they already knew. So you're elaborating and building on this new learning. And the last of the E's is evaluating, where you're assessing how much your students have understood, what their learning is, and you're measuring that in some ways against predefined expectations or curriculum outcomes or learning objectives, or perhaps even your grade level outcomes. So these are the 5 E's. And as you'll see, at no point in time will you in your own teaching have encountered that this is a sequence. So we don't always start a class with engagement. We don't always evaluate in every lesson. We don't always explain something in a class. There might be lessons where you start out with evaluations. You might want to see how much of a previous unit or a previous concept do students remember, and you might want to use that as a starting point to plan your teaching. You might want to not assess, for prior knowledge. You might want to actually assess in terms of how much do students know in terms of their own understanding of something that you're going to introduce to them today. So for example, let's say you wanted to start out by explaining the students a little bit about the respiratory system. And you want to get a sense of what do students already know about human lungs. So that's something that you could try out both as an engagement activity and it's also an evaluation. So this is a way in which you might want to structure your lessons, and you might want to try and mix and match each of these 5 E's into different parts of your lesson. And we're now going to go into a little more detail into what is actually included in each of these 5 E's and what can you do online. What are some of the online tools that you can use when you're trying to go about each of these 5 E's? So the first of these is engagement. And when you're looking at engaging your students, you're essentially trying to find a hook. How is it that I can get my student interested in what I'm going to start out with today? What are they curious about? And you're going to try and build on that curiosity for the rest of that lesson, as well as for the rest of that unit or the rest of that chapter. You want to tap into what they already know. How much do they know? How did they actually go about acquiring that knowledge? What are they wondering about what you want to teach? So for example, if you are teaching about photosynthesis, or if you are teaching a new novel, or you're beginning a new novel with them about soldiers during the Second World War, do they already know something about the Second World War? Do they need to know something about the Second World War? Most likely, yes. Do they know something about the First World War? So all of these different kinds of contextual understandings and contextual mappings you'll want to tap into when you're trying to engage your students. And what are some ways in which you can engage your students online, and some tools that you can use? I've listed out these 3 tools. And I know that, Lenny and as well as Chaitanya today are going to be talking about more tools that you can use to engage your students. Some of these are Padlet. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Padlet, Padlet is a beautiful tool which we are also going to be using in today's session to give you a flavor of what that tool would be like. It's an online pinboard of sorts. So think of it as a space where you give students an opportunity, a canvas to put out their ideas, to hold discussions, to share resources, to post their own resources, and comment on each other's work. Google Classroom, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Google Suite, Google Classroom provides us with a great opportunity to share resources with students, with getting them engaged in terms of asking questions. So Google Question within Google Classroom is a great opportunity for you to simply post a question and get students to respond to that question or that prompt or a series of questions and prompts, and also look at what others in their class are saying. And all of this can be done online. The third of these is Mentimeter. Mentimeter is an online poll, much like the poll you did just now. Menti allows you to do an online poll, send it out to your students, get them to respond to it even when they're not live. They can respond to it from their own homes, and you can view the responses when students come back into the classroom. So these are some tools that you can use to engage your students and to get that curiosity activated and get them engaged and engrossed with what you're going to talk about next. Exploring is when you're trying to pitch a new concept or a new content to students to get them to conduct some kind of introductory research. Now, when we're online, we're actually particularly well poised to do some exploratory activities, because you've given students the free time. When you set out an exploratory activity, your students have the time to actually go out onto YouTube, onto Google, onto newspapers or archives online to do some own digging and to come up with their own understanding of what you're going to be bringing to the table and discussing in the lessons that are unfolding. And of course, there are some brilliant newspapers out, especially today, who have actually made their archives accessible for free. The New York Times, for example, has put out their entire archives, if I'm not wrong, from 1920 onwards. And you can access all the newspapers. So for those of you who are looking at doing some kind of historical research, it would make for a great activity to get students to look at what the front page of the newspaper on a particular day back in time was. You also want them to perhaps look at some YouTube videos and go and find an interesting YouTube video they might like to share with their class, and look into or explore some concepts on their own before they come into class, and you elaborate on that. And that's what we're looking at next. When you're looking to explain students a new concept or a new content, mostly we are doing much of the bulk of our explaining during our live synchronous lessons, when we're doing a Zoom call or when we're getting students to come online on Google Meets. Many teachers are also actually recording lessons and sending students videos or voice notes with some explanatory content. And teachers can actually utilize these video lessons for instruction. So where you introduce or you explain a new concept, and then you can model something wherein you show them how something works. So for maths teachers, when you want to explain to them the workings of particular type of problem solving, you can use your whiteboards, and you can also show them how it's done in real time, or solve that in a video lesson, record your screen and send it to your students. You can also scaffold your learning. When I mean scaffold, I mean you can actually break down the learning into various parts instead of overloading students with one big 2-hour-long video that you've recorded. As beautiful as that might be, and as wonderful as the content may be, you might want to break it down and actually send it over parts. And you can actually do that very nicely, given the fact that right now we are doing this remotely. So you can send them a series of videos to watch, and your higher order learners can watch the videos faster as and when they go along, having understood the first of the series, and then proceed according to their understanding. And some great tools you can use, which I just mentioned as well, are YouTube, of course, for creating playlists. When you want to send them a sequence of videos, you can create a playlist and send it across to them. You can use QuickTime or Screencastify to actually record your own videos and send them across to your students. You can also use a great tool called Edpuzzle, which allows you to insert questions or activities in the middle of your video lesson. so that you know exactly what part of this series or what part of this video did your students not follow. And you get the responses for these activities and these questions that you insert in the middle of your videos um, at your end as the students are progressing. So you also know which student didn't attempt the answers. You also know which student didn't finish watching all the videos. So it gives you sort of live feedback on what you're teaching as well, and how the students are actually consuming that information. And the last of these is Flipgrid, which is another great video platform where students can actually create or showcase their understanding in the form of short videos, which they can upload. And beautifully enough, other students can respond to what other students have responded in terms of responding to each other's work in video form as well. So you can encourage a lot of collaboration and a lot of peer feedback using Flipgrid. When we come to elaboration, you can, of course, use the tools that I just mentioned in explaining when you're elaborating on a new concept as well. But the most crucial part of elaboration is to draw connections with real world problems, or to document your process as a group, where you're trying to get students to show their learning and to build on what they've learned over the last couple of sessions that you've done with them, or what they've learned on their own as well. And then also perhaps come up with a solution for a problem that you're trying to solve, or to perhaps connect it with something that they've learned in another unit or in another subject even for that matter. So you can even elaborate on, and build in transdisciplinary learning when you're getting students to elaborate on something that you've taught them. And of course, some of the tools that I talked about in the previous slide will also be really useful when you're getting students to elaborate on something that they've learned, and get them to make these connections. A wonderful thing to do for elaboration is, in fact, and something that's become very popular over the last couple of weeks especially, is when a lot of museums have opened up their doors for virtual visits. So you can actually send your students to some of these virtual museums and get them to explore what life was like at a particular time period. Go and look at perhaps the life of, a certain, what life is like in a certain culture or in a certain context. Some interesting architectural museums have opened up their doors, so you're also able to send students to come in to go and explore some designs, and also literature, art, and music, which of course are crucial to our understanding of any kind of context and building in any kind of contextual appreciation for our students. So that's what you could do when you're looking at planning for elaborating on a particular concept. And the last of these, of course, is evaluation. And when you want students to be able to, when you want to have your students evaluate something that they have learned, there are of course multiple ways in which you can try and do that. And on that note, I'm going to ask Gayatri to come in, because Gayatri has actually come up with some very interesting ways in which she's been evaluating her students, and how she's been using learning objectives to actually go about that elaboration. So Gayatri, if I can just ask you to come on board now, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and over to you, Gayatri.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. It's very exciting being here, and good evening to everyone. So as Pallavi said, I'm just going to share my screen there, just a second. So as Pallavi said, the first thing that we need to do is figure out what the students need. We have to figure out the students' and we have to figure out the lesson objectives, and that is the cornerstone of any lesson plan or of any teaching objective. So my presentation is going to be talking about how you structure measurable learning objectives. It's very important as we've transitioned from physical classrooms to online school, that the kids know they have specific objectives to, they know what the specific learning objectives of a lesson or a unit are. Every unit, every chapter, every subject has certain goals. Those lesson goals are broken down into subgroups, which are your lesson objectives. So the features of a measurable lesson objective. And I think it's particularly important now that we've transitioned to online learning, that we should be able to measure whether our lesson objective has been achieved or not. We should be able to measure if the student has understood what we are talking about in our lesson. And this is also particularly difficult when we don't have that human connect anymore, for want of a better word. So a measurable lesson objective is related to the outcome rather than the process of the lesson. These are specific, they are not broad and intangible, and they are concerned with the students. What's important is what is highlighted here, that they are concerned with what the students will be able to do at the end of your lesson, at the end of your activity, at the end of your week. It is not concerned with what the teacher will be able to do, or what the teacher, or the tools and the techniques that the teacher will employ. All of them, it has to be very student centered. So I'm going to be telling you today about how you can actually structure this measurable learning or lesson objective. So the components of a measurable lesson objective, we have three major components. Firstly, what are you trying to measure? The conditions under which that lesson is accomplished. And thirdly, what is the criteria? And I'm going to be talking about each of these in turn with some examples as well. So component one is fairly simple. Students will be able to do what? Our students, so if you have a very generic action verb, like students will be able to know, I'm an economics teacher, by the way, so that's why the example is about indirect taxes. So students will be able to know the impact of indirect taxes on different stakeholders, on consumers, on producers. So I cannot measure knowing. I have no way of measuring how a student knows something. It is very general, it is very generic. A good lesson objective, and this is only a partially, just the first component of a good lesson objective, would be that the students would be able to explain, would be able to define, would be able to list out, or would be able to compare and contrast the impact of indirect taxes on different stakeholders, on the consumers, on the producers, on the workers in that factory. So a good lesson objective uses a very appropriate action verb and stays away from generic action verbs like that the student will be able to understand or know. So this is component one taken care of. The second component of a good lesson objective, and I'm going to be developing the same lesson objective as I explain the components. So in the end, you will have this indirect tax lesson, a complete lesson objective for this indirect tax unit. So the second is that students will be able to, for example, explain the impact of indirect taxes on different stakeholders by writing and producing a 3-minute economic analysis video. So I have set up a condition under which this lesson objective is considered accomplished. I have set up some sort of activity or some sort of an outcome for the child to actually do, for the child to actually say that, look, I've written and produced this economic analysis video. For example, he's doing the impact of an indirect tax on cigarettes. So I have interviewed a few chain smokers and taken their opinion in my video. I have taken a few snippets of interesting YouTube videos and I have compiled them, and that is my 3-minute economic analysis video on the impact of indirect taxes on different stakeholders. I've chosen a few stakeholders. I've chosen consumers of cigarettes, and so now the student has done it. I set up the conditions, I set up the activity, and for that, Pallavi's sources, the 5 E's would be fantastic. Some of the sources for that, some of the tools, sorry, that you could use for that, for this were mentioned by Pallavi earlier. And now, but even then, so now the student has given you his 3-minute economic analysis video. To my mind, this is still an incomplete lesson objective because the student doesn't know on what basis he will be assessed. The student does not know on what basis this is a good video, or is it a bad video, or has he managed? So you have to give him certain criteria. So the third component is the criteria used to measure student performance. So we need to add certain information about how we will actually measure success or failure, and the student should be very clear. So I can look at that video and say, oh, well, this isn't good enough, it's very vague. Or I can look at it and say, oh, wow, this is really very detailed. But does the student know what is making it, what specific parameters are making this video detailed, or are they making it vague? Why has he got specific marks for it? Has he got certain criteria? So in the IB, in the International Baccalaureate, we have certain criteria against which the students are marked. So the student knows that he is being marked on criteria A, B, C, D. So the student will be able to write and produce a 3-minute economic analysis video, which is judged based on criteria A, B, C, D on the impact of indirect taxes on different stakeholders in the market. And now another, so that to my mind would be an ideal lesson objective, and that would be the starting point of your lessons. And in this time of online learning, it is particularly important that we have lesson objectives which are like this, which are which are measurable. And in some resources that we're going to be sharing later, I have an absolutely fantastic checklist for you as well, a checklist for when you make your lesson plans, and you can just check mark if the lesson objective is measurable, if the lesson objective is specific enough. So Pallavi will be sharing that with you, will be sharing that Padlet, or will be sharing those resources with you later. And another, and this would be, I think, my final point that I would like to make here, would be that Bloom's taxonomy, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. It is a very interesting way to kind of, it's a hierarchy of the way a child can think. It starts off with understanding, and the last point would be to create. So you can actually formulate your lesson objectives based on that hierarchy of thinking, from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. I have put that in the resources which Pallavi will be sharing with you as well. So I hope this starts off all your online lessons in a very interesting way. And yeah, and you can start off, you can engage, explore with your students, engage with your students, and tick mark all of the 5 E's. So yeah, thank you so much, and I hope you learned something new.
Thank you so much for that, Gayatri. That was really, really useful. And I'm quite sure that everybody here has gone away with a much sounder understanding of building some quality learning objectives, and how then that can be linked with designing their lesson plans and splitting up your lessons into the different types of activities which we use within the 5 E's instructional model. So thank you for that, Gayatri. And with that, I'm going to ask Lenny to jump in, because Lenny has some very interesting ways in which she's actually been planning with her students. So I'm going to have Lenny talk to us a little bit more about that. To give you a little more information about Lenny before she comes on, Lenny is teaching at the International School of Stuttgart in Germany, and she is the MYP coordinator there. The person project coordinator there, and she teaches MYP design, and is also an ATL skills expert, and is also an IB Educator Network member. So very experienced IB faculty there. So Lenny, over to you, and to your interesting lesson plans ideas.
Thank you so much. I will be the MYP coordinator from August, but not quite yet.
Oh, yes. That's why I wasn't sure if I should say that out now already.
I am hoping you can see my presentation now, or no?
Yes. Not yet.
No,
we can see your screen.
Give me 1 second, because my husband I'm using his computer and it's a little bit different to mine. There you go. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. So firstly, those 2 presentations were wonderful. During the first presentation, I was writing down loads of tools that I haven't included in the presentation. I will put them on the Padlet. And then during this presentation about learning objectives, I was thinking that's really how I plan summatives, like using the command terms, but I don't necessarily use it for my lesson objectives. I'm definitely going to start doing that soon. So here are two big problems that we're having with online teaching and learning at the moment. People think that it's going to be just the same as teaching back at school. Even if you are someone like me who uses a lot of technology, it is a completely different ball game. And then also, teachers are experts at pacing their own lessons. You can walk around, you can see exactly who's on task, you can see who needs help, you can see who needs to work with someone else. It's very different online to do that. And there are some benefits. You'll see that some students who normally don't advocate for themselves or are very quiet, they're very happy to ask you questions one-on-one on a chat, which they wouldn't do in front of their classmates. But you do see some of those students that really need extra support, especially our phase 1-2 English students, or maybe those just with poorer self-management skills. It is much harder to help keep them on track. So that's definitely something we need to consider when we are planning. So I've got a little diagram here. The top layer, the bold layer, is what I regularly do, and how is the italics, and then underneath, particularly for online. So I don't necessarily always plan exactly what I'm going to do in my online lesson. In my lesson in general, I will have a rolling slide deck for a whole unit, and then in my classes, which are an hour and a half to 90 minutes, I can respond. So I can say, okay, we're actually only going to do 3 activities today, or we'll do 4. So I can kind of cut it and change it according to how the students are progressing. The students do have access to see the whole slide deck. It's on our Veracos website. They can go ahead, but I'm not necessarily pointing that out. It's there if they want it. So now that we're doing this stuff online, I really am flagging that up and showing them what's coming. And I'm really looping them in and saying, you know, if we go back to school in 2 weeks, we're going to do this. If we're still online, we might do something different. So I'm really kind of letting them know what's coming. Again, I adjust to my students' needs. Always in my class, I'll set a summative and we'll have 3 or 4 lessons to work on it. And I'll ask them 2 lessons before it's due. Do they want me to adjust that, bring it forward, bring it back? And so I'm really able to respond. It's a little bit harder online because, again, you can't see your students. I use Microsoft Teams, which really is very laggy. So often the students don't have their cameras turned on. If 3 students unmute at once, it's a bit chaotic. So often it feels like I'm just talking to their icons. So I've been using a lot of tools online which can show me exactly how much time someone is spending on their work, exactly where they are. So I can really see their progress through that. I'm also using Google Docs where I can pop in and out of my individual tabs to see student or group progress. So I've had to adapt and use different tools to allow me to do this. And then I normally always involve students in my planning because it's very inquiry based. They'll help me come up with additional inquiry questions. I might have a suggested product that they're going to make at the end of the unit, but they also have other options. Now that online teaching is different, I'm really modeling myself as a learner by letting them know exactly what tool I'm using and why. And then I also show my screen and show them the data that I can see, show them the student view. Those things that I'm tracking their progress, I make sure they know it's so I can help you if you're behind, or I can see what level you're stuck on. And they really enjoyed that. They've been giving me a lot of feedback about the tools that they like, the tools they don't like. I've even got in my Microsoft Teams a channel where they can give me tips and they can give me suggestions for tools that other teachers have used. So it's really important that you don't hide these things, that you involve your students in the planning. It helps them to see you as a learner and for them to have an input in the class. So I just wanted to talk in depth about one tool, and then I have a list of more. This is one that I saw when I was listening to a podcast online, and it's called Parlay, and it has 2 features, online and live. The names are a bit misleading because both of them you can use in a real classroom setting, or you can use them virtually. So the online version, you give some students some sort of stimulus like an article or a video, and each student responds below. It keeps them anonymous, but you can see who they are, and then they can respond to each other. You can give them prompts to help them see how they should respond, kind of prompts for their feedback. Then at the end, you can also see who's responded to who, how long are the comments. You even get a word cloud made up of all the words in their responses. And the second one is a live version where you also give them some stimulus. I usually get them to watch a video beforehand, and then it's basically a debate or a live discussion. And when students want to pop into the discussion and say something, they tap in saying they have a challenge, a new idea, or they want to build on someone else's idea. So it really helps them to think about not just talking for the sake of it. And I'm thinking particularly about my MYP grade 6 classes. Grade 6 are kind of chaotic sometimes. But it really helps them think about the language they use. And throughout that, just like this chat, you can put polls on at regular points. I tried this with my grade 6s and thought maybe it wouldn't work. And actually it worked beautifully. And the students, one of them stopped me halfway through and told me how much he loved it. So on the Parlay, I'll have a link to a blog post about both of those. But I wanted to show this one because it doesn't only produce loads of fabulous data for you, but it even encourages you to share that data with your students. So I have on the top left, you'll see this shows me who has commented on who. So I can see, okay, it's kind of fairly even, but then it also gives me prompts that I can discuss with my students. Same with the word cloud below from that article. And then I can see on the right, how many people are commenting on who and how long their word counts. For the live version, it tells me who's been stepping in here. So you can see maybe this isn't the most balanced discussion. And I can see how many are new ideas, challenges, and build-ons. So again, the grey boxes are the reflection questions. So not only do you just show the students the data, but it really helps you to discuss it with them. One of the other things I just wanted to mention briefly is that with this online teaching, I thought this is going to be great. I'm going to have so much free time because, you know, at work, you're teaching, planning, grading, but then you're also having coffee with colleagues, or you're also going into different meetings, or also you're photocopying, or also there's all these little things that fill up your time. I soon realized that actually online teaching is just as busy, if not busier, than teaching in school, often because you are doing a lot of planning. But maybe we do have some more free time at the moment because you know, we're not going to the cinema, we're not going out to eat. I don't have kids, so I'm obviously in a different situation to many people who do have kids that this might not be the situation for. But use this time wisely. All those things that you have wanted to learn about, wanted to explore, tools you wanted to try, this is a perfect opportunity to do that. So I've been trying new stuff, been watching YouTube tutorials, I've been blogging a fair bit. But yeah, it's definitely a time for you guys to push yourself professionally, and you're already doing that by being in this session. So here are some of the tools. I'm not going to go into depth about them just because I know that other people are covering them. I know that we already mentioned Mentimeter. I just want to say something that I like about Mentimeter is that when students respond to the prompt, it can be a poll, so it can show you a graph. It can be an open question. You can have all their responses floating on your screen. Or you could say something like, describe online learning in 3 words, and it makes a live word cloud. So it's really, the results from this poll are really good for discussion as well. And then most teachers are using Kahoots in their school. Kahoots work really well in the classroom because the questions are on the teacher screen and then they answer on their screen. Now, unless your student at home has a laptop and an iPad or a laptop and a phone, it's a little bit difficult to use because you go from tab to tab. Whereas quizzes, the questions are actually on their screen. So that's really one to try. If your kids are missing out on Kahoot, definitely try quizzes. And then Jamboard, I wanted to just point out, because if you Google the word Google Jamboard, it shows this big smartboard, whiteboard that cost $2,000 that Google made. And it was originally made to use this software. Now the software is available for free. You use it just like you would a Google Doc, and you can have several students on it and they collaborate. They can put post-it notes, add images. It really is like a mood board or like a pinboard, but they're putting their ideas. Now, as I said, from watching the 2 chats earlier, I've remembered loads more little things to think of, so I will put them on the Padlet for you. So thank you for listening. I hope you guys all understood my accent, and please reach out to me on Twitter or my blog if you have any more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Lenny. That was really, really wonderful. It's actually amazing to see how you're able to so effectively involve your students into your planning process. And I thought that was one of the most beautiful parts of what any educator can do at this point in time, especially when students don't know what to expect and they don't know what's coming next. So thank you for that. I'm going to very quickly, and also so that there's a little bit of pacing of the content, I'm going to very quickly open up the floor and try and take a couple of questions that have been coming in for the last few minutes. I know that there are some of us who have talked about the slides and the slides being shared. Don't worry, you'll get all the resources and all the slides for today's session. You will all get a link to the Padlet where all of these resources have been stocked. There is a question that I thought was particularly relevant, and I thought that maybe some of you panelists might like to take that up. Somebody asked today that how can you sort of plan for different kinds of tech abilities that your students have? So students might have, and this is coming in from Diana. She's teaching at the DPS Bhopal. She's asking how we can cater to students who possess varied learning styles. So for example, she's talking about visual, auditory, kinesthetic as well. And then there's somebody up there before that who talked about how is it that we can cater to different tech capabilities. And I think that we can probably try and connect both of these. And if there's any of the panelists who'd like to take on that question, Lenny, can I throw that at you, since you were already just talking about the different kinds of tools that can be used?
I'm definitely happy to answer. I mean, I have had kids that their Wi-Fi is down. I have some kids who've already gone back to Japan or to India, or people who are staying in hotels with low Wi-Fi. But also I have students who are, you know, learning support students who really need their handheld. And something that I really like is that I can give them the activity at the beginning of class. And even if I say, click this link and watch this video and fill in this worksheet, I'll still have students saying, what do I do? Right, that's just the nature of it. But what happens is when I send them all off in their work, I can have these one-on-one calls with students. I can get them to share their screen and I can help resolve issues just as I normally would. And students are also really good at helping each other. So I use Microsoft Teams, and within Teams, I have little, in my team, I have channels set up, and each channel has about 4 or 5 kids in there. And so they also help each other and give each other feedback throughout. So I think don't be afraid if something goes wrong or they can't do it. It doesn't matter. If a student misses one particular thing, that's fine. They can catch up. I have one student whose YouTube is blocked in his house for some reason. So I found the transcript for him. There are workarounds, just like in our normal class. Like, students come up with the weirdest questions, the weirdest thing will happen, the fire drill will go, the fire alarm will go. You know, we're usually very, very good at adapting to the unexpected. So don't be afraid to be the same in online. And yeah, if things go wrong, that's life.
Super. And I know that there's a couple of questions that are coming in for math and science. So for all the math and science teachers, don't worry, Chaitanya is just going to be coming up and he's going to tell you lots of amazing things about the math classroom. But very quickly, one thing that I wanted to highlight, a lot of teachers are asking questions about the various safety measures that you can keep in mind when planning for online teaching and learning. I will put up on the resource list that I send out to all of you, I will put up a couple of safety guidelines for using tools like Zoom and Google Classroom. So don't worry about that. And on that note, I'm going to quickly pass on to Chaitanya. Chaitanya, if you could take over, and I think it's given that there's so many questions coming in about how can we do something interesting in the math classroom, I think that's a great cue for you to get started. So to those of you to introduce Chaitanya to all of you, Chaitanya is the head of math department at the Suchitra Academy in Hyderabad, and he is also a very enthusiastic technology user. So he's figured out lots of great tech tools that you can use in the math classroom. So Chaitanya, over to you.
Thank you, Pallavi. Yeah, as many of the members of our audience have been mentioning, that the math department is probably one particular department which has been plagued by the pandemic, not just the COVID-19 patients, because we just don't have a direction. We don't know where to start, or how do we convert what we normally do in a classroom into an online thing, because math is a dynamic subject. You know, there is the scope for lots of questions right in the presence of the teacher from the student. Now the students are away, the teachers are away. So what do we do? But like the previous speaker said, this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us. So one of the things that we had to do was, of course, decide on which platform to use. So we said, let's use Google Classrooms. Let's use Google Meet for video conferencing. And one of the striking things that that we happened to understand was that these kids, these are students, they watch movies, they watch Netflix, they watch Amazon, they play video games, all of this on this small 2D screen, either the TVs or the computers. And I'm going to be on it as the next option, as the next channel, which means I should be as attractive to them as a Netflix is, or as attractive to them as their video games are. So one of those ways is to identify and design tools for them so that the whole of the class doesn't sound just like a static board or a pen and paper thing anymore. Right? It's more of a watching thing, a visualizing thing. And so for that, we dug up the GeoGebra. It's probably one of the coolest mathematical tools available on the planet right now, prescribed by CBSE and many other organizations as well. And you can see what I can do with this. Live, right in front of my students, I'm going to teach linear equations, I can teach polynomials, I can teach circles, angles, similar triangles, congruent triangles, you name it. Coordinate geometry or geometry, 2D, 3D animations for that matter, probabilities, statistics. There's so much that can happen in GeoGebra. It's one of those tools which I happened to come across in a workshop conducted by Dr. I.K. Rana from IIT Bombay. And it was a memorable thing. So this is one of the things that I do. Also, what we need to remember is kids keep asking these questions. Okay, I'm learning this math concept. Where do you use this in real life? I think online classes have given all the math teachers that opportunity to answer that question in a very personalized way. Say, for instance, I would want to clarify where polynomials were used in real life or where quadratic equations were used in real life. But I can show it projected on the screen in the classroom, and then everybody would watch it as if they were sitting in a multiplex. But now the space is more personalized. The child is watching it right in front of him. It's almost as if he's sitting in his own home theater and watching all this stuff happening. So you have plenty of videos on YouTube, you have plenty of resources online, there's plenty of reading material, all of which can be utilized. Right, now all this is fine. But what about the regular writing thing? You know, how do I help my students with presentation then in that case? Because at the end of this, remember someone like even Ramanujan also had problems because he was not very good at presenting his ideas. He was excellent at formulating ideas, but his problem was with presentation, proving things, which means our students need some sort of a visual platform, again, like our regular boards, to visualize stuff. Now, the best thing that we could come up with is bring this option, whatever option you want to bring now for the regular Blackboard, bring it as close as possible to the physical class. So that experience has to be as close as possible. And so we brought up the open board. I started off, with my colleagues back at school. We started exploring this tool together, the open board, and we thought, right, this looks fine. If I probably scribble on it, kids can watch. I can write texts. I can put images. I can upload PDFs. I can upload my textbooks, and then keep toggling between them. What all of us actually back at school later found out was there's so many applications that this open board has in conjecture with this simple writing which you're seeing right now. Do you want to do geometry? Yes, sir, available. Do you want to teach geography? Yes, sir, available. Do you want to teach painting? Yes, sir, available. What do you want to teach? Everything is available in open board as a separate app. There's plenty of applications within open board itself. So this is, again, one of the coolest tools that you will find. It's free, it's downloadable, and if you're an IT guy, you can actually tinker around with some of those settings that are there in open board. And for once in life, a math teacher suddenly starts looking a lot cooler than he is. Right. Now we have all the platform with us. The infrastructure has been given to us by the school. We have the tools with us. I have GeoGebra, I have this, I have that, all that is there. But how do we implement it? That's where we figured out that we need to practice this in small groups with our co-teachers. And that's where you would come up with interesting things like, all right, when we are sharing our screen and showing this particular working, how do we know whether a student is seriously watching it or is he lying down on his bed? That's one of the questions. What about content coverage? Remember, on a regular Blackboard or a whiteboard, your content coverage is much faster when compared to your online platforms. In fact, we could quantify it to somewhere in the ratio of 3:1. A 1 hour regular class covers 3 times what you cover in a 1 hour online class. That's how much we quantify it because we practice within ourselves. And this is such a key thing because you don't want to be scrambling for ideas while you're teaching, because you don't want to opening a new tab, suddenly searching your Gmail for a new file or opening up a new PPT. Everything has to be prepared, which means you need to know the top to bottom of whatever tools you're using. So practice is very, very essential. And so once I have all the tools in mind, I thought it was only rational for me. I teach grade 10 math. So I thought, let me start coordinate geometry. A, because it has nothing to, or very little to do with the other topics in the textbook as such. It's not in the serial order, but it doesn't really have dependencies. And even if there are dependencies, we can always come back to them while you're taking another chapter. Another cool thing is I can use GeoGebra completely to teach this. Because you can use the area tool in GeoGebra, you can actually use the distance tool in GeoGebra, everything is visual. So this works out. And so in our lesson plan, the learning objectives were more or less the same because that is what we want our students to do. But teacher activities change slightly because we are bringing GeoGebra into the picture. Live collaboration is one thing which I think all of us should start using very, very judiciously. Because this is one platform where you're allowing minds to be creative and to start digging up whatever they've learned from the previous classes or from anywhere else as well. So Google Drawings, Jamboards, what I'm showing you is something which grade 8 kids came up, grade 9 kids came up with. The English teachers in our school, the social teachers and all of them, they came up with really, really cool looking charts and Jamboards and stuff. So it was really wonderful to watch them. I've shared some of my findings in the Padlets. Probably when all of you have time, we can go through them about GeoGebra, about OpenWord, and about another tool called Equate.io. In the interest of time, let me not cover that right now. You can always have a look at Equate.io as another tool where you can write equations in a book, take a picture, put it in a Word document. It's that easy now. That's about it from my side. Remember, these tools are there to survive with us even after the pandemic is over. So please feel free to explore them and practice. Practice is very, very essential. You need to know what you're doing. Thanks a lot.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Chaitanya. It was amazing to see. I'm always fascinated whenever I see that the GeoGebra board, having not had the chance to explore that as a language teacher. I think it's fantastic, the kind of tools that we've actually now been able to get access to. Okay, and our next panelist, Jyoti, is actually coming in right at the time when we've moved away from the math questions and onwards to some questions for language teachers. So Jyoti is actually is an English teacher at Nehru World School, and she's a PGT English teacher, and she is proficient with designing interesting activities for her English classroom, and she's tried to come up today with some very beautiful ways in which we can actually go beyond just planning for academic work. So Chaitanya, thank you. From that very academic presentation, I'm going to move to Jyoti, who's actually going to talk more about how we can plan for student well-being, which is a very crucial part of our planning process, really, but sometimes gets overlooked. So Jyoti, over to you. Jyoti, are you able to hear us?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Pallavi. And a big thank you to all my friends. A very good evening to all of you. It was indeed a pleasure and a great learning listening to all of you. 5E's learning objectives, various teaching tools and teaching strategies are actually very important to make the classroom interesting, engaging, and full of learning. Thanks once again. So I'm here to share something different from what all you have shared. So when the pandemic hit the world and the teachers across the globe started exploring various ways to benefit their students, we at Nehru World School were also concerned about our students' well-being. And I'll come to this well-being part in a while. Actually, our school could foresee much before time the looming challenge of lockdown in India due to COVID-19. So a group of teachers started thinking in the direction of getting the best platform for online teaching, and academic teachers started revisiting their annual academic planner, and then they replanned. They broke the chapters in small chunks and laid main emphasis on the conceptual understanding. So we as a school decided to go slow in our classes and give enough time to our students to adapt the new learning environment. We did not waste even a single day after the school closure. And the very next day, we were with our students in online classes. This could be possible because of planning and a vision ahead of time. For the well-being of our students during online classes, we thought to engage them in yoga.
Jyoti, are you here? Are you still with us? I think there's a connectivity issue. Okay, while we wait for Jyoti to come back, I'll just quickly take this time to, and I know we have to wrap up as well, but I'll just quickly take this time to address some of the questions that had come up in the chat. Some of these had to do with resources for specific subjects. We will be doing another session next week on how you can design more effective activities for your individual subjects. And if you'd like to know more about planning for some of those subjects, we will have subject experts coming in for those sessions as well. You might like to sign up for them. We will also be putting out some more resources, like I was saying, in the Padlet that I'm going to share with all of you now. And over the course of the session, whatever resources have come up in the chat will also be available to you when you get the recording of today's webinar. So don't worry, you won't lose out on any interesting sources or resources that was shared by everybody else. To also quickly wrap up, I think Jyoti may have dropped off. I'm not sure if there was a connectivity issue there, but no worries. We still have some of the interesting things that Jyoti wanted to talk about on the Padlet that I'm going to be sharing with you. So all of you will receive a link to a Padlet which has all the resources that we have talked about today. I'm just very quickly going to share this.
I think I'm back to you.
Oh, you're here. Okay, great, Jyoti. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I was talking about a kind of display that we have in our classes. This slide, Pallavi, can you see this slide?
Oh, can't see it yet.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Nope.
All right, no problem. This is already there on Padlet, and it will reach all the attendees and whosoever wants to take it from you. So this slide does not only talk about day, date, subject, topic, and learning outcomes, but it also sets certain ground rules for online classes. For example, turning the video on. For example, using emojis. Yeah. And they do ensure safety of the students, and it also helps in creating a better teaching learning environment. So this display also helps the teachers to form a warm connect with the students. So how does that happen? So teachers talk to the students about their health and their efforts to stay healthy and happy in this challenging time. So I could not show you the display, but it is already drafted on that, like staying at home, washing their hands frequently, having vitamin C loaded fruits and vegetables. So these kind of conversations frequently take place in the class. And these dialogues actually make the students and their families feel happy and cherished. So after this entire planned effort, we make our students aware of the learning outcome. And it now brings their focus to academics. So to meet the learning outcomes, we have kept our remote learning lesson plan very simple, workable, measurable, and effective. We have divided it into three parts, three categories rather, and I'm trying to share that again with you. Can you see now, Pallavi?
Yes, we can see. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is starter, main learning, and assessment. So what we do in these classes, we make sure that active learning strategies are used, and we students in constructing their own as a facilitator. So the class becomes more engaging. In a starter, we plan those activities mainly, which help students not only revisit their previous knowledge, but also they are diagnostic in nature. And it helps also in our future planning. For example, KWL chart using Padlet. So when the students write about what do they know, that is about revisiting their previous knowledge about the subject, and what they want to know is actually helpful in going ahead with our classes. We also use pictures, posters, slogans to start the class discussion. Coming to main learning, we at times play videos, pause that regularly to ask questions. And here we really drill our students a lot. And we ask many Bloom's taxonomy based questions. And we have a resource to refer to for those kinds of questions as well. In our planning, when a child asks questions, we give chance to the students first to answer that. And then the teacher debriefs at the end. It actually makes the class exciting, attentive, and interactive. To break the monotony and hold the interest of the students, we also used flipped classroom strategy, and it really worked well. The participation was comparatively more, and students were quite hooked to the class. For the third category, assessment, that we take very frequently, we use quizzes, Google Forms, Khan Academy for mathematics, or time-bound worksheet in the class. Here we use Active Inspire with a curtain to reveal one question after another, and this makes everyone finish in time. So I would like to say that it is due to our planning and good execution that we have been able to sustain 95% attendance in online classes. The vision of Nehru World School is striving for excellence today to prepare students to embrace the opportunities and challenges they may encounter tomorrow. We at Nehru World School are ceaselessly working and brainstorming to plan even better to prepare our students not only mentally but physically too for any kind of challenge they may face tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jyoti. That was very, very useful. I really liked how you start out your lessons with checking for student well-being. I think it's wonderful to see that kind of personal touch going into your lessons. Okay, and I know that we're running short on time, and we really do need to wrap up. And with that, I'd like to thank all the participants as well as all the panelists that were here today. Thank you, Gayatri. Thank you, Lenny. Thank you, Chaitanya. And thank you, Jyoti. It was really interesting listening to all of the great work that all of you have been doing in your classrooms. And for the participants, I know lots of questions are coming up about when we'll send in the resources. Don't worry, you'll get the resources with a link to this lesson in an email in your inbox very soon. For those of you who are looking for a session on assessments, lots of questions came up on how do you assess students online. We are doing a session, a specific session on assessments next week. You will be able to get access to those details in the email we send out, as well as on both the landing page of the FICCI ARISE and Higher websites. You will also be able to access these in the follow-up emails that we send out to all of you as well. With that, I'm going to quickly sign over to Praveen. Praveen, if you'd like to sign off on our behalf. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all the panelists once again.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for sharing the wonderful work you all have been doing. You have so much to learn when great teachers are presenting. We would like you to keep your calendars blocked for the next part of the series. We have another great set of teachers presenting on creating lesson plans for remote learning for primary on May 6th. The details will be sent out to you soon. My sincere thanks to Lenny Dutton, MYP Design Faculty and Project Coordinator from Stuttgart, Germany, Jyoti Kumar, English Faculty of Nehru World School, Ghaziabad, Gayatri Mehta, IBDP Faculty, Economics and Global Politics, Pathway School, Noida, Chaitanya Kolluri, Head of Department of Mathematics, Suchitra Academy, for having shared the great work that you've been doing. I would like to especially thank Shobha Mishra Ghosh, Assistant Secretary General FICCI, and her solid team of Samreen Gauri and Malika Marwa. I would also like to thank Pallavi Dwivedi for helping us put this series together and supporting it. A special thanks to my friend Arunabh Singh, founder of Nehru World School and chairman of FICCI ARISE UP West, to help conceptualize and handhold the effort. So see you all on May 6th. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you all.